Hello? Oh god, okay. Now it should be working. I think. Okay, yeah. Hi. Welcome to another episode of Mia is having technical issues, which seems to happen every other week here on my live streaming channel. Hello. Some people can see me. Thank God for that, at least. This is an election update. I think it's the third or fourth one since the election. Welcome to my humble abode and my humble home. And I'm going to talk about the Swedish election that happened almost a month ago. And we still do not have a government, or we don't even actually know even what potential government we're going to have. If you have any questions about politics, feel free to ask. Why is my window open? I should actually fix that. So I'll be back. It's probably making a lot of noise. Typical. Well, I just knocked over half of the things in my room, so hello again. I hope everything is working better now. Everything's fine. Welcome to my home. I'm in my very noisy bed once again. One day I'll find a better way to better place to stream, but for now, you're stuck with me. Cold in Sweden? Well, I'm a Swede, so it's not really a problem for me. Actually, how warm is it? This is my hair is wild. Yes, welcome to my hair. It's big, especially when I wear these. If you go back to every other live stream, you'll see my hair is weird. This is also the way my live streams usually go. The point of the stream is to talk about, Swedish politics, but right now I'm just talking about the weather. It's 13 degrees centigrade, and that's not too bad. That's fairly warm. It's not like perfect summer weather, but it's okay. It's October, isn't it? Oh yeah, it's Spooktober. Okay. So, if you are new to my channel or new to my content, you should know that these streams go pretty off topic pretty much all the time. So, if you have a question, feel free to ask. Most of my questions I do on my Patreon exclusive streams, which are more like my answer thing. So I can't guarantee that I'm actually going to answer a question, but if it's about the Swedish election, then I will do that here, because this is part of the election thing. Um, 50% frost resistance. Yeah, this country is sometimes cold. But I live in a pretty well insulated apartment, so I don't really have to deal with too much heat, thankfully. So before I start getting into like the news that have come from this weekend, I talked about this in yesterday's Patreon stream too. So if you're a patron, you probably know most of the things I'm going to say in the first 10-15 minutes. I completely blanked. I don't know on what I was going to say. Yeah, before I get into all of that, before I talk about the news, I want to give a quick channel update. As you know, my latest video about Sweden and the international review on Sweden has been late. It's 2 weeks late now, and I apologize for that. My only excuse is that, well, my life has been turned upside down just within the last 2 months. And if you follow me on Twitter, then you probably know some things about how my life has been. So my excuse is that. But if you're worried about Patreon things, you don't have to worry too much. The video that I'm coming up with hopefully next week is going to be, the September video. So if I don't do a video for October, I'm not going to take payment for October. I don't want to do that. But hopefully I can churn out this video because it's almost done. So I can put that out, talk about Sweden, maybe have a couple of extra live streams to make it up for you. And then I'm gonna make another video for October. The end of October is gonna be pretty interesting for me, and I kind of want to talk about that news too. The days leading up to the 27th, I'm going to be having a kind of charity stream. It's gonna be super unofficial. It's not gonna be a big thing at all. It's literally just for for you. But that is in build up for another charity stream that I am going to be part of in Sweden, which is called Skräckafton or Spook Night, which is on the 27th, where we raise money for mental health organizations and suicide prevention services, which is something that my friend, a good friend of mine, has been doing for the last couple of years, and I have been part of that charity stream since I used to be part of the video game zeitgeist of Sweden. So I'm gonna do that. So in lead up to that, I'm gonna have my own charity stream in English because the charity stream is going to be in Swedish. So for you people who maybe don't speak Swedish, we're gonna play some spooky games and maybe raise some money for charity. And that'll be fun. And that's probably gonna be on this channel. Your Twitter has brought me to your channel. I like your bits. Thank you. I always love more fans. More people to serve my needs. My dark needs. I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, so the actual question at hand. I keep getting conflicting info from YouTube about how the stream is going, so I'm just gonna keep going. The news from the Swedish election. From the last stream, I think the right-wing coalition has, last time, the right-wing coalition was tasked with trying to find a viable option to form a government. So far, that has not gone well, and in the events of this weekend has been that the leader of the right-wing party, the Conservative Party, put up an ultimatum to the liberal parts of that coalition that we need you to support a government that only consists of the Conservative Party, and you need to support that potential option for a government, with the implication that the Swedish Democrats, which is Sweden's most right-wing party that has neo-Nazi founders, that's not even an exaggeration, would also be supporting that same government option. All parties in Sweden have kind of said that they will never work with the Swedish Democrats, but the Moderate Party and the Conservative Party have been like, well, maybe we should do that, because they are currently controlling almost 20% of the electorate, which means that neither the left or the right coalition can form a majority government. But the implication has been that the right-wing coalition might have an option to start a government, despite having the least amount of seats in parliament of the two, left or right blocs. However, I think yesterday, Saturday, the coalition, the liberal part of the coalition anyway, said straight up that no, we will not support a government option that partially doesn't include the liberal parties, but also would require passive or active support from the Swedish Democrats. And everyone was kind of confused as to what this meant a couple of days ago. would this mean that the right-wing coalition has died and collapsed? Or did this mean that the moderate party, the Conservative Party, would try to form a government alone without the support of the Liberal parties? As it stands right now, the Conservative Party has given up trying to form a government. They will no longer try to find partners. They will not try to find options in other parties to support them, which means that the task of forming a government will most likely go back to the Social Democrats, which is the largest political party in Sweden, and also in charge of the left bloc that also has more seats than the right bloc. And this means that we will most likely end up with a form of centrist government, kind of, because the moderate party never wants to work with the Social Democrats, but maybe the Liberals do. So this would also mean the complete end, the complete destruction of the right-wing coalition. I realize that these kind of elections might be super boring for people who don't care about Swedish politics, but hey, I'm Swedish, this is what I do. And the right-wing coalition that is called the Alliance it formed from a need to kind of oppose the Social Democrats, because historically the Social Democrats have been the dominant political force in Sweden, sometimes getting over 50% of the vote alone. And Sweden has over 8 political parties, so getting over 50% is amazing. And they are also what created the Swedish welfare state and the view of Sweden as a socialist state, because the Social Democrats are social democrats. Recently they have gone into becoming more socially liberal, and this is what leads me to think, at least, and what leads many other political analysts to think, that most likely Sweden will end up with a centrist government with support from very left-wing elements, because the left party, the former Communist Party, are still supportive of the Swedish Democrats as Social Democrats, and the Social Democrats will, since they are the largest party, will most likely be the ones who form a government, with maybe support from the Liberal parties, or would have the largest minority government, which would be interesting. And that would basically be the same kind of political environment that we have already, and nothing will really change. So either the most predictions anyway are that either Sweden will end up with a centrist government led by the Social Democrats, or would end up with a left of center government, and both of these options are pretty okay, at least compared to a conservative government, or worst case, a conservative government supported by the fascist party, the Sweden Democrats. So that is the most relevant news, I think. That is the most news that happened so far. And I was considering maybe postponing this video, because next week, I think Tuesday, the Speaker of the Swedish House of Parliament, who is in charge of presenting government options to Parliament, will most likely give the mission of forming a government to the Social Democrats, the leader of the Social Democrats. And this would mean that they would be the ones who, they would probably explore government options that would leave them in charge, obviously. And this might work, maybe. But Sweden is on the clock, because Sweden has to present an option sooner or later about what kind of government we should have. And if but so far there has been no vote, except for the general election, but there have been no vote in Parliament as on a government coalition yet. And Sweden's government system works in the way that you can have 4 tries, pretty much, which means that the Speaker of the parliament can present, like, this is the government that I think will probably get elected. And then the parliament votes on it, and if they get more votes for them than against them, then they will, then they will become the government. But because both blocks control pretty much 40% each, no one can get a majority, which means that government building is kind of hard considering the fascists control 20%, almost. And no one wants to work with them. And the two other blocks are very isolated. So the hope is, at least now from many like leftists, or in Sweden at least, is that the right-wing alliance, the right-wing political coalition, will die, and hopefully one of the liberal parties will switch from the conservative bloc to the left bloc. The problem with this, though, is that the voters for the liberal parties voted for the liberal parties, expecting them to be part of the right-wing coalition. But then again, also expecting the right-wing coalition to win, but they didn't. They got one less seat in parliament than the left-wing bloc. So it's a very complicated situation. And there is a possibility that the speaker will present an option that is a minority option, i.e. under 40%, under 50%, and might not get approval from parliament. And if this happens 4 times in a row, we need to have another general election, and a so-called extra election, which pretty much everyone is agreed will not help anyone. But it is something that might happen. Most likely an extra election would benefit the Sweden Democrats, because they are the anti-establishment party. They are they are the reactionary party. So if you're angry about another election, then they will probably get the most votes from that. Other winners from that might actually kind of be the left party, and maybe even the Social Democrats, because throughout this entire crisis, right, they have just said that, well, the left bloc got the most votes from any coalition, and they think that the largest coalition should be able to form a government. And so far that has rung true. It's just that the right-wing alliance has been kind of saying that, well, no, well, maybe we can maybe form a government somehow anyway. But so far that hasn't turned out any results. Which means that we're kind of in a deadlock situation. And there is a possibility that we might not end up with a government at all, because even if we do get an extra election, there's no saying that any bloc, any coalition would even get over 50%. That's very unlikely. If anything, it would just polarize things even more, with the Swedish Democrats getting maybe even up to 25% instead of 18%. And that would just make everything a lot harder than it already is. So that is the situation currently. It's chaos. And that is what I've been living with. So hopefully Tuesday, the speaker will give the leader of the Social Democrats a try to form a government. Maybe a liberal party will switch sides, but they will be seen as traitors, unfortunately. They are already being seen as traitors, and by a lot of conservative politicians who say that because they didn't support an only conservative government that would rely on support from the Sweden Democrats, they are betraying conservative values or liberal values or right-wing values, which is kind of absurd, because the liberal parties in Sweden are pretty liberal. They're actually liberal parties. And they are in a coalition with the Conservative Party, because the alliance was formed to kind of crush the Social Democrats, because if the Social Democrats keep getting over 50%, or even say 40%, they still dominate a lot of Swedish politics. So all other political ideologies kind of have to band together to fight that if they ever want any kind of representation in Swedish politics. And that is why liberals and conservatives in Sweden work together. But the Sweden Democrats are so extremely conservative, so extremely reactionary, and I'd say even regressive, would that is, I think it's even too radical for most liberals today. Actual liberals, not like YouTube liberals, classical liberals or whatnot. So that is the situation. How are people feeling? Otherwise, in the chat, apparently, according to my metrics, I have 16 or 17 people watching, which is pretty good. Hello, and welcome to my ranting content. This is usually what happens. So I'm gonna take a quick look at the chat and see if anyone has any questions, and you can ask questions however you want. Feeling a bit relieved. Yeah, the right-wing alliance might die, which is partially a good thing. It's partially a bad thing also, because it means that the conservative elements in Swedish politics will probably become even more conservative and maybe become a bit radicalized. But it does also mean that the liberal parts will at least be freed from their conservative influence. And conservative liberalism is a kind of an oxymoron anyway, which means that at least pure liberalism is at least not regressive in the same way conservative values are. And there's a part of me that is hopeful that maybe living with a centrist government led by a center, left of center party, it's better than the alternative. Even if the Social Democrats are pretty bad in many other respects, unfortunately. However, any kind of government led by the Social Democrats will have to, like, there's no question, will have to become dependent on the left party, the former Communist Party, which is now very socially democratic, like properly social democratic, not like most left part Social Democrat parties these days. Which means that, like, if that coalition wants to do something really weird, they will either need to get support from conservative elements in parliament or from the left party. And I think that the liberals will most likely seek support from the conservatives, but the Social Democrats will hopefully want support from the left party, as they have done for the last 100 years. So the question is, like, how much power the liberals would have in such a coalition, and it all depends on the relationship between parties. And that's a big flaw in Swedish democracy also, that even now, almost like more than a month since the election, it's still very unclear what kind of government we will have. But it's also kind of good, because it all depends on good politicians in parties working together, making compromises that over things that don't matter, in order to make reforms in the areas that do matter in a positive way for their own party, obviously. But that also means that, maybe the liberals, they might not care about certain issues, which means that they might go left on those. But in other issues, they might go against the social democrats, but the Social Democrats might not care as much. So it's a good compromise system, kind of, but it's also very confusing, because the day after the election, even before we knew properly who had won, we could have either a left-wing government, a centrist government, a conservative government, or a neo-fascist government. So there's a part of you that says, like, well, does the election even matter at that point? Because the election does matter, but it could easily be undone by, like, bad politicians making bad decisions after the election. But that's true in pretty much any kind of political system, unfortunately, except the American one, this is one of the few areas where the American system win. But that's because the American system is not really operable in modern democracy, but it avoids the problem of multi-party coalition building. But that's because the American system only has 2 political parties anyway. Big floof. Oh god. God, that was pretty much a half-an-hour rant. These videos are great. These videos are easy for me to make. I can just rant and rant and rant onto into a microphone and into a webcam. Even if it doesn't mean being on a bed that sounds as if I'm having. Not very practical. Okay, I haven't saved any questions for this thing, and I don't really have many predictions either, except for, you know, maybe, you know, discussing potential future party coalitions, but I don't really know what to say about that, except for I suspect things to go. I suspect that we will end up with a centrist government. Which means, I don't know what that would mean for Sweden though. Ironically, it would maybe actually make Sweden a bit better when it comes to accepting refugees, because the liberal parties are pretty good with that. But it would mean a disaster maybe for the welfare system. It all depends on the Social Democrats. Swedish politics, yo, it's a mess. At least with the American system, you know who's won after the votes are counted. And that's true even in most situations. Hell, even the British had a government after a while in their general election. But here in Sweden, it's over a month and we still don't know. Oh God. If you have any questions about Sweden in general, you're free to ask that too. This is about a Sweden. This is kind of a Sweden. This is a kind of, I don't know what this is. Is this a Sweden type regular live stream, I guess? Who knows? I should also say that since, like, same as the last election stream, these videos will probably be kind of short because, you know, most of the conversations that are happening in the government quarter in Stockholm, and I'm not there. So most of the news that we get are pretty much like statements from political parties, and we only get those like maybe once a week, and they're not really saying much, really. What happens if no one manages to make up a government after 4 tries? Another election. Then we have to have another election. And technically, the Swedish system is supposed to work that after an extra election. No, it's fine. After an extra election is called and is counted, then you have another 4 tries. And then after that, you would have another extra election if you can make it after those 4 tries too, and it would just keep going forever, which is a very impractical view on democracy, and I don't think that has happened, or I don't think that will happen. However, it's important to note also that in Swedish history, Sweden has never ever failed a single vote. So even if we have 4 tries, we have never even needed 2 because we always got it on the first one. Which means that we don't really know what will happen if this fails, because it would be the first time in history, in Swedish history anyway, where we would not have been able to form a government on the first try. And that includes even, you know, during World War II, when actual Nazi organizers and actual, you know, Bolshevik parties are fighting in the streets and gaining a lot of power in government. What happened then was that we were because the Swedish parliamentarian situation was very similar. 1936 or 38. I don't remember the election then. What specific year the election was? I think it was 36. So it would be 40 again, 1940. what happened then was that instead of forming the traditional left bloc and right wing bloc, the largest political parties, I think the Social Democrats then too, because they've been around for a while, and I think the Right Party then, kind of merged to form a wide centrist government, a kind of crisis government that didn't really do much except just maintain order. But it was kind of a compromise on the concept of democracy even, because both parties sort of betrayed their own voters by doing this, but also they did manage to unite, and by doing that they also organized heavily to crush extremist elements, which means that right-wing extremists and left-wing extremists neither got any seats. Well, they did get seats, but they never got like any influence in government, and it never became part of the actual government, even if they were part of parliament. And even then, you know, we managed to kind of avoid that. The only other time in Swedish history where such thing has happened was in 1907, I think, or maybe 1904, during the Union crisis, where, because over 100 years ago, Sweden was in a personal union with Norway, because we invaded Norway and we took it, and we held it for almost 100 years. But then, during that, because a lot of Norwegians were fighting for independence, and as they should have, because we didn't treat them that fairly, the parliament kind of banded together to just form a major coalition bloc that could, well, in theory, lead the country through a difficult time. I think the actual goal was kind of to mobilize for a potential war with Norway, but it never got that far. And you know, we let them vote for independence, and I think like 99.7% decided to leave, which is completely understandable. At the same time, even then, you know, we managed to form a government, even in those actual chaotic times. And the modern age is pretty chaotic too, but in a different way. But that's mostly because we don't really see war as the end point of diplomacy anymore, thankfully. However, because like a lot of normal parties, a lot of like established parties are getting radicalized, and we've seen this in America too, where we kind of saw an attempt of return of extremism a couple of years ago. I want to say like 10 or 12 years ago, with, for example, the Tea Party or for example, the Sweden Democrats, with you know, very extremist factions getting support. UKIP, for example, in Britain, and in France, La Front Nationale happened there too, where individual parties started to form outside of the established parties. But recently, just in the last maybe 5 years, it's been seen that that tactic doesn't work. We've seen those elements getting crushed from the established parties, actively organizing to destroy those elements. Which is good sometimes, where right-wing extremism is getting crushed. I like that. But also it does mean that sometimes left of center coalitions are destroying like actual socialist movements, which I'm not super into. And we've seen both of these kind of happen in America recently, in a response to this, because we've seen like the democratic socialists in America growing as a political movement, but also what has happened in America, like more practically, and all over the Western world, is that this extremism has started to seep its way into established parties, because that is a tactic that right-wing extremists and left-wing extremists, to be fair, find to be working more efficiently. So, like the Tea Party, for example. The Tea Party as its own political movement didn't really take off, but as soon as they started like influencing actual Republican politicians and making the Tea Party part of the Republican Party, more like they've always been that, obviously, but like more more formally part of the Republican Party, then they can shift the entire political platform of that party in a certain direction. And the advantage of doing that is that then you can start, because people who then don't agree with the party can be removed within the party, like individuals within the party, instead of the entire party as a whole. If you control the party, you only need to manipulate members. If you are outside the party, then you need to fight the entire party, even those who agree with you within that party. So the Republican Party, for example, has shifted much to the right. They've always been right-wing, but they've shifted much more to the right recently. We've seen the Tories in the UK also shifting a bit more to the right, taking voters from, example, UKIP. We've seen like conservative parties in France also shifting to the right, trying to steal voters from La Front National. And we've seen the same thing in Sweden, and this is the topic of the video. We've seen this in Sweden too, where we have this established right-wing party. We have like an attempt at organizing an extreme right-wing party, and it hasn't worked. They are polling 18%, sure, but they're not winning politically. They're not getting into government. They're not really getting any seats that matter anyway. They control maybe one local government. They are in coalition with local government in maybe 2 or 3 local governments, and we have dozens, probably hundreds of local governments. So this isn't a victory for them. They are polling semi-high numbers, but they're not actually getting anywhere. They're not cooperating with other parties. But what is happening that is a danger, and that hasn't happened in previous, I want to say constitutional crises, is that the established parties are adapting to that. They are kind of shedding themselves from elements that aren't beneficial to them at the cost of ideological purity, which means that conservative parties might become more reactionary, like traditionally reactionary. Liberal parties might become more conservative in order to just pick up more voters, right? And this is what the Conservative Party has been doing in Sweden, and they've been pushing far to the right, which is why they are even entertaining the idea of working with the Sweden Democrats. We've seen the same thing with the Tories. They've also been pushed to the right, and this is a compromise, right? Because then you also have the extreme right movements that are organizing themselves, and the further you can push the established parties to mimic the right-wing extreme parties, then you can either get cooperation, which benefits everyone in that situation, everyone in that coalition, everyone outside of it is probably fucked. But it also legitimizes the extreme right ideas. So it's more practical for right-wing extremists to infiltrate established parties and push them to the right, so that those parties will partially do the politics that they want, but also give support to the outspokenly extremist parties that support the actual more regressive ideas that the party wants, which is where we see, because most conservative parties in the Western world have this now, where there are extremists within like pretty moderate parties, right, where they are just so entirely extreme, but because they are so vocal and because they are so extreme and so verbose, they are pushing the entire party with them because they're still part of the party. People who don't like that sort of extremism or verbosity are kind of alienated from the party, and that also pushes the entire party towards the right. In Sweden, we have, for example, Hanif Bali, Rebecca Uvell. All of and those people are like, they're very vocal. They're very they're much on Twitter. They spread misinformation. They do all that kind of stuff. They are basically the Donald Trumps. But then we also, in the American sphere, we have Donald Trump, very verbose on Twitter, very verbose, very vocal, very angry at debates, for example. And people who don't agree with that within the Republican Party are ostracized, which pushes the entire party further to the right. and accepts more people who think like Donald Trump. It becomes like kind of the ship of Theseus thing of politics, where you start like removing the sensible bits of conservative politics and replacing them with batshit insane people slowly over time, which means that sooner or later the entire party will become basically a batshit right-wing extremist party. Now, I don't like conservative parties either. I don't really like liberal parties either, but they are traditionally, at least, supposed to be a different type of ideology than the reactionary right. But what we are seeing is that they are kind of being shifted and morphed into becoming more like the reactionary right, which benefits the reactionary right and literally no one else. That was a long rant about reactionism. The question was about how many tries we got. Do Swedish people have a bonus using cold magic? Yes. Isn't that kind of the logical endpoint of conservatism? It depends on how you see it. If you see conservatism, if you see like political ideologies as kind of a fixed point in space, in political space, then conservatism ideally is different from reactionary conservatism, in theory. However, that doesn't work because society changes. Society is inherently progressive because people are born, they die, they do things while they live, and society will change because of that. That's unavoidable. Cultures will change, language will change, politics will change, material conditions will change, the environment will change, the capitalism will change, the market will change, everything, literally everything, a single thing will change in one way or another. But if you only take a snapshot of society as it exists right now, then you don't see the change. You only see the way it is right now. And in that world, conservatism works. And there are like moderate conservatives that ascribe to that kind of conservatism. It's just that they don't understand that history is a thing. I'm casting a lot of shade right now at conservatives. But I think that's important because society does change, and this, if you have a snapshot of society and you say, well, I'm a conservative, I like the way it was 2 years ago, for example, or something, then you have two snapshots that you are comparing, and you prefer the former. The farther society just progresses naturally, the farther away you are removed from the snapshot that you took, partially of the thing that you think the present is, but also the thing that you want to return to. And it becomes this more abstract idea of the past. And the further removed you are from that, the more disillusioned you become. And no, that's the wrong word. The more deluded you become. And after a while, you are approaching this fantasy idea of the past. It doesn't really exist because the current snapshot is changing, but the snapshot that you took 2 years ago, which is now maybe, I don't know, 50 years ago, has remained the same. But because the differences are so much larger, you can't see the bad parts with the old picture anymore. And suddenly you end up with this, and then they become reactionaries, then they become like extreme regressives, and if you have the historical context in point, then yeah, conservatism does eventually become reactionary, because there is no other way to actually maintain conservatism, because society will change no matter what the fuck you want anyway. And so yeah, but there is supposed to be at least a logical point to conservatism, and I think it's important that, because a lot of conservatives they lose perspective that is needed in order to maintain a status quo, which is what a lot of conservatives want. They ignore that the status quo has a lot of bad things connected to it. So when things change for the better, they think that things are changing for the worse, which is why you see a bunch of conservatives being angry with gay people existing, or divorces. People think that a lot of divorces are bad, especially conservatives. Conservative thinks that like divorces are a bad thing, and cite the number of divorces as a metric of how bad society is. And it's like, no, divorces are good. The more divorces there are, the better things are going, obviously. Because people can get out of bad marriages. No one divorces a happy marriage. So yeah, so if you didn't know, that is how a rant usually goes with me. Someone asks me about how the government formation works, and I start ranting about conservative relations to reactionary thought. You should read my essays on the topic, because they are the exact same. I start going into these long, convoluted rants. I should also notice, I think I might have said this before, but I will only stream for an hour today, so I'm gonna stream for 10 more minutes, because I do need to get back to other things that I'm doing. One of which is the video. I still need to shoot some scenes, I still need to do some editing, I still need to do some things. Hopefully that video will come out next week, but I'm just gonna stream for maybe 10, maybe 15 minutes more, but as you know me, I'm probably gonna rant for another half hour anyway. If you were on the Patreon stream yesterday, you know that I ranted about my favorite type of rock for probably 5 or 10 minutes, because I have a favorite shade of gray for rocks. It's hashtag 1990, by the way, if you want to look it up. Hello. Hello, friend. Can I just say also that I really appreciate the fan base that I have a lot, because I remember starting this a while ago and then going on a hiatus, and I was worried that, oh no, I'm gonna lose everything, I'm gonna lose my entire fan base because I've been sick for a while. And now I'm back and doing streams, and you're all here, and you're all so nice, and I love you so much. If you have a question of any kind, feel free to answer it. Although if it's just a question about like me or my life or anything not about Sweden or like politics, you can ask me a question about any kind of politics, really. But if it's a question about like not related to the topic, then I'm probably gonna save it. And if you're a patron of mine, then you can go watch my Ask Me Anything streams that I do twice a month. I'm just gonna check the news to see if something has been happening, because due to the news that have been happening this weekend, we have no idea what's gonna happen, and apparently something is happening today. The Social Democrats have just kind of announced. Well, no, wait. Okay, this is how it is. Sources within the Social Democrats are saying that they might not be able to form a government too much this fall, but that potentially potentially they might need to call an extra election, but that they really don't want to under any circumstances. Sources are saying that it is practically impossible to have an extra election. They don't mean that it's hard to do, they mean it would be disastrous and political suicide to have an extra election. And I agree. And most political analysts in Sweden agree that doing that would be disastrous for everyone except the Left Party and the Sweden Democrats. But those are the most extreme parties. Although the Left Party is just like a socialist party. They're not that extremist. But they're socialists, and they do want to, abolish capitalism. So that's nice. Mia is never late, nor is she early. Yes, my video will come soon, I promise. And it won't be late. Are there any genuinely good leftist politicians you particularly like now in Sweden, as in individuals, not parties? That's a toughie. Leftist politicians that I like, that's a hard question. The problem is that, like, because it's focused so much on parties, most people just toe the party line, and people are rarely opinionated enough to distinguish themselves from the party at large, if that makes sense. Although, like, from a personal point of view, I do kind of like the leader of the left party. He's kind of fun. He bakes buns and gives people dating advice on Instagram. And he also goes to, like, conventions and hangs out with people in fursuits and cosplay. Which is, you know, that's interesting from a party leader. But he is also someone who seems to care enough about his cause, and seems to be, like, pragmatic enough to perform them properly. Which is good. I think it's a good trait for a leftist politician to at least be pragmatic, because we don't live in a perfect world where you can be, you can't practically be a very progressive socialist in all time, because you won't get any support from other parties. You would probably get support from your own party, but you wouldn't get support from other parties. But Jonas Sjöstedt, who is the leader of the left party, he's been pragmatic on the things that don't matter and steadfast in the things that do. So when it comes to the environment, the rights of refugees, education, healthcare, taxes, those kinds of things, like important issues, he will not back down, and he is super strong about that. And I think that's good, because I think it's important for a lot of politicians to at least be pragmatic enough to talk, but not too pragmatic, so that they start betraying their own ideological values, because then democracy doesn't matter anymore. Politicians need to follow their ideology, because that's what the voters vote for. If they don't if they're not steadfast in their ideology, then democracy doesn't matter, because then you can do whatever you want. But yeah, Jonas Sjöstedt seems pretty good. Leader of the left party. He's pretty cool. But he's cool in a kind of personal, like, sociable way. Also, like, not just that that he has a lot of political integrity. Just that he's, you know, he's fun. It's cool to see him on Instagram whenever he goes to conventions and talks board games and video games. I'm trying to think of local politicians, but the problem with Swedish politics is that, like, I've worked with a lot of local politicians, especially in my last job in local government. The problem is that they rarely distinguish themselves enough to actually set them apart from others in the party. It's just that, like, because Swedish politics is so party dominated, it's all a matter of sociability, and, like, how well do you promote the party's ideas, not your own. And if you do have your own ideas, then you do that within the party, you don't do that publicly. And that's good in a certain way, because it means that you vote for a party, you don't vote for a person. If a person dies, or if a person quits the party will still have those values, unless it's collectively changed it at the party convention. The problem with America, for example, is that individuals have so much power that you could vote for. There could be two different people within the Republican Party, for example, that have entirely opposing worldviews. Same with the Democratic Party. We're to the point where party almost doesn't matter. But in Sweden, but that also means that you need to check up every single politician every single time, no matter the election. In Sweden, you can pretty much vote for the same party everywhere in the country, and they will have pretty much the same politics, with some few exceptions. But 9 times out of 10, they still have the same politics, even in local government. But there are exceptions, obviously. So it's not really a question of like local, like specific politicians that I like, except for, you know, public ones, like the leader of the left party. It's more like people who I dislike, who, who aren't politically steadfast, so to speak. So that is how things have been anyway. Sorry for being quiet a bit every now and then. I know I should keep talking forever. But it is past 9 now, so I am gonna start closing this stream up in a bit. I'll take maybe 1 or 2 more questions if people have them. I realize that my fan base isn't super active sometimes. This bed is making so much noise. Good God. I really need to fix that somehow. But yeah, it's past 9 p.m. for me in Sweden right now. So I'm gonna wait for a few minutes and then I'm gonna have the thing. And then I'm gonna end the thing. A lot of people are still hoping, like there is still a possibility that the Speaker of the Parliament won't actually give the mission to form a new government to the leader, to the Social Democrats, the largest party. There's a chance that the mission to try to form a new government will maybe go to a centrist party, or maybe even the Sweden Democrats. But I don't think that will happen, because that's very unrealistic. I think the reason the Speaker gave the mission to the moderate party, the Conservative Party, is because the Speaker is a member of the Conservative Party and only got elected because he had the support of the Sweden Democrats. But it is unprecedented that someone would vote for their own speaker, well, vote for a speaker, vote to resign the current government without presenting an option for their own government. And currently the right-wing alliance doesn't have that. So it's unclear what will happen right now. But then again, a lot of people are suspecting that, you know, that the mission to form a new government will go to the the former prime minister, to go to the leader of the Social Democrats, and if he does that, and then I think he will be able to form a kind of government. But it is possible that that will not work. It is possible that he might give the mission to a centrist, and it is even possible that the centrists will be able to form a government on their own. That is a technical possibility, albeit unlikely. I can't really give any like big God, what do you call it? Suggestions? Any proper predictions? Because this is a very complicated topic, unfortunately. Okay, I'm not getting any questions, so I'm gonna finish up the stream. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back, hopefully, probably, if not, I'm gonna be pissed at myself. This week, a video about Sweden and why so many right-wingers internationally, most prominently Paul Joseph Watson and morons on YouTube, are so fascinated with my country and why they keep making videos about it. So that is the topic of my next video, and that is the topic that will come up. If everything goes well, that's gonna come up this week. And if I'm really lucky, another video will come up this month. And I'm also going to remind, at the end of the month, I'm going to have a charity stream, probably on this channel, where I'm going to play video games to raise money for charity. And that is going to be in the lead up to me being on a charity stream in Stockholm, playing a very spooky game and probably screaming my tits off. But that's going to be in Swedish. So if you don't speak Swedish, I suggest that you join my stream instead, because that's going to be in English. Okay. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you later.